A fragile ceasefire in Gaza is holding despite more violence between supporters of Fatah and Hamas. Forces loyal to both factions have withdrawn from the streets in an effort to maintain calm.
10 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called for early elections on Saturday. Nadim Barber has more.
In Gaza, the fighting is supposed to have stopped, but these scenes came just hours after the latest ceasefire announcement. Here, Fatah loyalists expressed their anger after two fighters linked to President Mahmoud Abbas's faction were killed in overnight clashes. Once again, a Palestinian woman mourns a youth cut down in his prime, not by an Israeli bullet this time, but by infighting. The pair were cousins, both in their 20s. Interior Minister Saeed Sayyam announced the ceasefire deal, saying the aim was to stop what he called lawlessness. Sayyam also repeated Hamas's support for a Palestinian state within pre-1967 borders, provided that Israel accepted a long-term truce. Tuesday's clashes between forces loyal to Hamas and Fatah killed 6 Palestinian fighters, and there were also several abductions. Palestinian officials expect President Abbas to hold a long-awaited meeting with Israeli Premier Ehud Olmert in the next few days. But for the people of Gaza, peace at home is the burning concern. Nadim Barber, Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera has obtained a recorded statement by Al-Qaeda number 2 Ayman al-Zawahiri. He criticized the Palestinian government headed by Hamas, saying that giving total control to President Mahmoud Abbas would mean the end of the Palestinian cause.
The Israeli army has suspended 2 soldiers after the death of a 13-year-old Palestinian girl near the West Bank town of Tulkarm. The army says it's still investigating what happened. The Israeli soldier who shot the girl said he believed she was a suicide bomber. Palestinian witnesses said the girl was playing with a friend near the barrier that separates the West Bank from Israel when the soldier opened fire. She later died in hospital from her wounds.
Fighting has erupted in Somalia outside the government stronghold of Baidoa.
The violence comes a day after a deadline calling on Ethiopian troops to leave or face war passed with the guns largely silent. The courts accuse Ethiopia of backing the faltering transitional government.
Exclusive pictures shot by Al Jazeera show both the courts and the government preparing for conflict as fighters, fuel and ammunition move towards the front line.
A European Union envoy is in Somalia to try to bring both sides to the negotiating table. Well, for more on this story, let's go to our Somalia correspondent Mohammed Adaw, who joins us live. Mohammed, can you tell us what the latest is on the fighting?
Well, surely the fighting continues. Both sides are using heavy weapons, anti-aircraft missiles mounted on pickup trucks are being used, as well as all other kinds of weapons. The fighting that started this morning on 2 fronts has now spread, and both sides are now fighting on 3 fronts, some very close to Baidoa. The closest the fighting is to Baidoa is about 9 miles or 15 kilometers. So there has been casualties on both sides, and each group is claiming victory, but there has been no independent confirmation so far.
And Mohammed, we know the EU envoy, Louis Michel, is in Mogadishu to push for new peace talks. He's certainly got an uphill battle, hasn't he?
Indeed he has, because as he was talking to the president and the prime minister of the transitional federal government, fighting was going on very close, and the sound of gunfire was being heard from the town of Baidoa. Now, Louis Michel has just landed in Mogadishu in his efforts to try and bring both sides to the round table of talks. He will have talks with Islamic court leaders here in Mogadishu to try and impress upon them to accept dialogue as a means of solving their conflict. Whether this will succeed remains to be seen.
And Mohammed, how are people there reacting? Are they preparing for war? Because there are fears that there will be a huge wave of refugees heading towards neighbouring countries like Kenya.
Indeed, yes. A big refugee wave is expected, but people here in Mogadishu have been having calls coming to them from the Islamic Courts Union for a while now, for the last few weeks, and have been the Islamic Courts Union have also been increasing their calls to the public ever since they issued the deadline for Ethiopian troops to quit. Many have registered for war, but many also are saying that they are apprehensive and don't want war. Many people living in villages nearby Doha have also fled, fearing that they will be caught in the crossfire. Many others are also expected to flee in the coming days if the fighting continues.
And of course, a conflict there won't just have repercussions in Somalia. There'll be serious repercussions across the whole of the Horn of Africa.
Indeed, yes. Analysts say that this is a war that's not going to be just stopping inside the borders of Somalia, but it is expected to cross the borders and affect countries like Ethiopia, which is said to have sided with the Somali government. On the other side, Eritrea is fully supporting the Islamic Courts Union actively and according to the UN, even with forces. So, and we know that Ethiopia and Eritrea have a history of fighting and are still feuding over their common border. So with two countries that have such a history fighting in Somalia, there is talk that it could become also a proxy battleground. Somalia could become a proxy battleground for Eritrea and Ethiopia to settle their scores.
Okay, Mohammed, I know you'll keep a close eye on developments there for us. Mohammed Adaw in Mogadishu in Somalia there.
Yes, meanwhile, in an interview with Al Jazeera, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Meles Zenawi said his country would prefer to avoid a regional conflict, but they are prepared to defend themselves should the need arise.
Yeah, we would prefer to avoid conflict naturally, but if it comes to it, we're prepared to see to it that we protect ourselves. Because all we are asking of the Islamic courts is not to trouble us. It is in the holy books of the Islamic religion, the Prophet is supposed to have said, don't trouble the Abyssinians unless they trouble you. That's the only country which is mentioned by name where Muslims are not allowed to trouble the Abyssinians. Now what we are saying is, don't trouble us, we're not troubling you. Don't declare jihad on us. Don't try to force Ethiopians to live under your regime, Ethiopians of Somali background, cultural background. That's what we are asking of them. We're not asking for the moon. We are asking for normal interstate relations.
Are you confident that this is going to end without any gunfire?
Well, if it were up to me, I would be very confident because Ethiopia is not spoiling for a fight. But it's not solely up to me to resolve this problem. And given the background of the Taliban group in the leadership of the Islamic courts, there is a lot of room for apprehension as to whether they are prepared to resolve the problems peacefully.
New U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates has arrived in Baghdad on an unannounced visit 2 days after taking up his post. Gates' visit is being seen as part of U.S. President George Bush's plan to forge a new strategy in Iraq. Gates is currently in talks with Iraqi leaders. He's also expected to discuss how U.S. tactics can be improved with U.S. commanders on the ground. His trip comes as a new Pentagon report shows violence in Iraq to be at an all-time high. But even as Gates lands in the Iraqi capital, 2 suicide car bombings have left at least 12 people dead. In this attack, 1 civilian was killed and 4 others wounded when a bomber detonated his vehicle in a residential district of northeast Baghdad.
The genocide trial of Saddam Hussein is continuing, with prosecutors presenting more evidence of the former Iraqi leader's alleged crimes against the Kurds. Saddam faces a possible second death sentence if convicted. He's already been sentenced to death by hanging for the deaths of 148 Shiites in the town of Dujail.
Meanwhile, it appears the United States is preparing for a major shift in military policy in Iraq.
The US president has acknowledged for the first time that America is not winning the war and signaled he's planning to increase the number of troops in the region, at least for a short time.
In a Washington Post interview, George Bush said the United States is not winning or losing, but needs to reset its military, and he added that all options would be viable.